then that's the only way I think now confidence will really return to this. This can't be done by the Americans.
Do you think anyone, by the way, is the Australian government in a position to push for something like that? And do you think anyone at senior levels in the government is thinking like you are?
Well, yes, I think so. And Australia is in a position. I mean, we played a role, the Prime Minister played a role in getting together the G20. But you see, the problem, the central question I think that President Obama faces is about China. That is China a commercial competitor that has to be strategically watched? Or is it a new building block in a new multipolar world? Now, I believe it's the latter.
Well,
the Americans believe it's the former.
It is one of the only countries in the world with a large economy that actually is likely to continue to grow, possibly at much reduced rates, but over 6% in the coming year, it's predicted. It also has a stimulus package, which is worth 16% of its GDP. You've just seen what the Prime Minister said about the hit the Australian economy has taken because of the China trade collapsing, because of slowing growth. But is China, do you think, our best hope?
Well, I don't think Tony, it's not going to really be about our best hope. We're all going to be in this until there's a restructuring of world power and world financial aggregates. I mean, what's happened here is this. You had a complete mispricing of credit. It went on for years. You had the Chinese with this massive surplus. I mean, picture this. You have a massive dam of savings. You have a huge pipeline via a loose monetary policy in the United States, feeding funds to the core of the international financial system in New York. So it's like a dam with a huge pipeline and a massive sprinkler. And you had the investment banks throwing the money around to every nook and cranny of the economy. In the end, the investment banks were servicing the least worthy credit customers of America, the people who couldn't even afford a normal mortgage. And that meant that the Chinese were then buying American Treasury bonds in competition with the American government. This lifted the price of bonds and pushed down the yields. When the yields of long-term bonds came down, long-term interest rates came down. So you just imagine, you're a big investment bank, your Merrill Lynch or your Goldman Sachs or your Bear Stearns, you've got a ton of money coming in the door at low interest rates in a high-growth economy. So they just kept on piling it on. So we had a super boom. And the super boom has blown out, and it's blown out in the biggest way imaginable. It's wiped them out.
Well, let me ask you this, because Kevin Rudd sees this as an ideological shift, a major point, an epoch changing. He says, and I wonder, do you agree, that the global financial crisis has its roots in the free market fundamentalism and the idea that the financial system is self-regulating?
I think there's much justification in that claim. The great claim of Greenspan was that the markets would self-regulate themselves, would regulate themselves. But once they took away the Glass-Steagall Act, separating commercial banks from investment banks, of course you started to see the commercial banks buying up investment banks. You saw, Deutsche Bank buying up Bankers Trust. That was one of the early ones, and we've seen, a series of them. It's the reason why, and the Royal Bank of Scotland buying recently ABN AMRO, Citibank buying one of them, and each time they have gone through the boundaries, this has happened. Now here I set up a thing called the Four Pillars policy. Banks can do what they know themselves. I mean, they are fundamentally utilities. They buy credit off the market, they lend at a margin. They assess risk. But once they get into areas they don't understand, and particularly where you're taking essentially the securities of the least valuable borrowers in the country and then giving them a AAA credit as you slice them and dice them into what they call collateralised debt obligations, aided and abetted by the rating agencies. What you had then was a wholesale loss of control by the Central Bank of the United States over the creation of credit in that country. Now, in his testimony, Greenspan said, well, I didn't see the flaw, but he was quite happy when pressed over the years to ask about CDOs, credit default swaps and all of these things, to pull them back. But they didn't pull them back because why would they? They knew that the Chinese surplus was an anomaly, as they knew the surplus was being cycled in the United States by Japan and by other countries was an anomaly, but they let the anomaly continue and they let the big investment banks spread the money and push it into every neck and cranny of the place. I think what we've got to go to is not get too ideological about it. In the end, rational policy is always good.
Well, let's stick with ideology for a moment.